find a good sex therapist? And how do you know if you need one? That's what we're getting into in this episode. So let's start with how you know if you need one. Basically, your sex life isn't working. Now, that could mean that there are issues of function and performance. So maybe issues with maintaining and achieving an erection, or reaching orgasm too quickly, or taking too long, or having an inability to sexually respond, or avoiding sex, or sexual conflict, or getting too dependent on pornography, where that's taking the place of a real relationship or in the way of your sex life. There's a lot of reasons why people should and could go and seek the help of a sex therapist. And let's just explain what sex therapy is, because there are some myths about it. I've been a sex therapist as well as an individual and couples general therapist for over 30 years. And it's always fascinated me, all of the misconceptions people have. One of the most common ones is that people confuse sex therapists with sex surrogates, okay? Now, what a sex surrogate does is they actually have sex with their clients as a therapeutic process. So let's say someone has huge inhibitions, or wants, needs some very specific guidance, or has a disability that they're trying to figure out how to work around, and they want in vivo hands-on assistance. There are sex surrogates out there who get paid to have sex with you in a kind of therapeutic way. That is not sex therapy, okay? Sex therapy is talk therapy. That is not watching you have sex and giving commentary. We aren't touching you. We aren't having sex with you. That's not happening. This is all conversation. But we will get into the nitty-gritty of your sex life, and you will say things and share things with us that you probably haven't shared with your best friends, certainly, hopefully, with your partner, but often, sometimes even we hear things that you haven't discussed with your partner yet. So typically how it works, sex therapy, and we'll get to how you find a good one in just a minute and what to look for. But just so you understand the arc of how sex therapy works. So let's get into how sex therapy works, like what happens during sex therapy. And in just a minute, we're going to get into how to make sure and what to look for to make sure that you're getting a good sex therapist. So what typically happens in a sex therapy scenario is that sometimes it's a sexual issue that if you're single and you're struggling with some sort of sexual function issue or low desire or inhibitions or sexual trauma, then certainly you would go alone to the sex therapist. But if you are in a relationship, you definitely want to go as a couple. Even if it's you or your partner who's the primary patient, sex if you're in a relationship is always a couple's issue. And by the way, it could be sexual function issues, it could be inhibitions, it could be trauma, and it also could be infidelity, sexual infidelity. Those are the most common reasons people seek a sex therapist. So the first thing the sex therapist will do is meet with both of you, if you're in a relationship, as a couple, and get a general sense of what's going on and each of your perspectives. Like I always like to say to my couples, and this is me, every sex therapist is different, but for me, I say, I don't care what the truth is, because I don't care what the truth is of the dynamics between the two of you, because that's not what you're living. You're living each of your perspectives. So I'm much more interested in how each of you are experiencing and seeing the issues in the relationship than what the meta view of the truth is, because the truth really is irrelevant if each of you are believing what you're believing. So the first session is just understanding the scope of the problem, how each of you are experiencing it, and setting some goals for the treatment. Then typically the sex therapist will separate you. So the next session will be 2 individual sessions, usually about 45 minutes to an hour. And this will be, if you're in a couples therapy scenario, this will be the only time you're meeting alone with the couples sex therapist, unless one or the other of you really needs to go off in a different direction on your own for a while, like if there's real trauma or other things going on that need specific individualized care. that sex therapist may refer you to someone else or sometimes see you individually in addition to the couples. But for that second session, they'll do a sex history with each of you, which is really interesting. And you'll be asked all kinds of questions, from your sexual development to your earliest sexual messages, to how you were raised, to your first sexual experiences, any kind of exploration you did, any kind of trauma. We basically start at birth and go all the way through. And this is your time to be unequivocally honest so that the sex therapist really understands all the moving parts of what might be coming to bear now and the issues that you have between the two of you. And this is also a time to give your specific perspective on the issues that maybe you weren't as comfortable talking about yet in front of your partner. So sometimes things will come up like my partner doesn't really know how to sexually stimulate me and I don't know how to tell them, or I'm not as attracted to my partner as I was 20 years ago, or things like that. Now, what I always warn my couples about before we do the sex therapy is I say, look, this time is each of yours individually. I'm going to ask you a million questions. I want you to be really honest with me. And if anything comes up, this is totally confidential. We aren't going to share with each other what we talk about, okay? But, and this is a big but, if something comes up during the sex history and that private session that the other partner doesn't know and is really important to the treatment. So let's say that during that individual session, you come out with the fact that you're having an affair. I won't out you if you've told me that, but I'm going to work with you around how to come clean with your partner with my support. So anything that will inhibit our ability to work, to really work effectively together and for you to get the treatment you need, we're going to get into how you can bring it up. I won't out you, but I'm going to support you and really encourage you to bring it up with my support. And we'll come up with a strategy of how to do that and how to alleviate any of the shrapnel and outgrowths of that disclosure, right? So that's the only kind of exception to the confidentiality rule of that first individual session, sex histories. And then you come back together as a couple. And sex therapy is very directive. So each session, you'll not only be going over what the issues are and what's underneath them and how to address them, you will then be given homework to do together as a couple. And usually you meet once a week. In most cases, sex therapy in its purest form is what we call behavioral therapy, meaning that the sex therapist gives you very specific exercises to do and treatments to try and strategies to use and troubleshooting to carry out. And so it's very directive in that way. But in my 30-year experience, it is really, really crucial, and this is where we get into what you're looking for in a therapist. It's really crucial that your sex therapy, especially if you're in a couple, that your sex therapist has really solid general couples therapy experience. And if you're an individual and you're not in a relationship, that your sex therapist has really good general individual therapy experience, because it is a myth that sexual issues are just about sex and that you just need to kind of tell the people what to do sexually and everything will get better. Because 9 times out of 10, there are emotional and relationship underpinnings, meaning causes that have nothing to do with sex. Issues of trust, issues of communication, issues of past trauma, issues with your family of origin that are playing out in the relationship now. All of these, issues of anger management. There are all of these communication, so many dynamic issues that have nothing to do concretely with sex, but are a huge part of not succeeding sexually with one another, okay? And very often, as a result of sexual issues, let's say one of you isn't interested and withdrawn from the relationship, or one of you, has all of a sudden wanting to introduce something into the relationship sexually that the other partner doesn't want to do. Resentments can build, miscommunications can build between the two of you as a result of the sexual issues that don't go away on their own once the sexual issues are addressed. So you really want a therapist who is adept at both sex therapy and general therapy. There's a really big misconception that most people have when they enter sex therapy that I'm going to get to in a minute, but let's just get into where to find a sex therapist who not only is good at that behavioral piece and has that experience and training, but also is a good general therapist. And frankly, it is not in the general therapy pool because surprisingly enough, the majority of couples therapists and individual therapists don't address sex at all. And I can't tell you how many people have come to me for treatment and said they've been to therapist after therapist, couples therapist after couples therapist, and told them that the issue was a sexual discord or a sexual disconnect or a sexual issue. And the therapist said, okay, we're going to address that. And then never mentions it again after months and months of treatment. And of course, the issue never gets solved. So it is astounding to me how many general therapists just don't touch sex with a 10-foot pole. And similarly, there are tons of sex therapists who won't address any of the emotional relational stuff going on. So the best place I have found to look for a good sex therapist is in the organizations where sex therapists gather for further training and collaboration. So the most common ones are AASECT, A-A-S-E-C-T, and to the editors, put that on the Chiron. The American Association of Sex Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, and their website is asect.org. You can also go to STAR, S-S-T-A-R, which is the Society for Sex Therapists and Researchers. That's more of an international organization as opposed to an American organization. Now, once you go to their provider list and you put in your city or zip code and you see your list of people, then the next step is to look for people who, because they'll put their profiles and or their credentials or their resume up. Are they just trained as sex therapists or are they also general therapists? So if they have, a psychology degree, a clinical social work degree, a master's in family and marriage and family therapy. So anyone who has like an MSW, or sometimes it's called an LSW or LCSW, that's a social work degree, or an MFT, a master's in family therapy, or any kind of master's or PhD in psychology, then they, in addition to whatever sexual therapy training they have, then they're going to be someone who can do that dynamic sex therapy with you that's really the most effective. And then once you've narrowed down that list, then the work to find a good therapist is almost done. And I'm going to talk to you in just a second about what to do if your partner doesn't want to come to sex therapy with you, which often happens. So once you found that list, you want to have a conversation with them. Almost every therapist is willing to have, a 5 or 10 minute conversation with you, hearing what the main issues are and telling you whether they, would be a good fit and seeing if it's a good fit, right? And what you're looking for is someone you're not going to know right away. You have to meet them and spend time with them, but someone who you can kind of imagine what they're saying makes sense to you. It gels. You feel like you might, feel comfortable with them. And if you're in a relationship, will your partner feel comfortable with them? And it doesn't have to be about gender or anything else. It's really about how does that conversation go? And do I think my partner will feel, comfortable with this person or will respond to this person? Now, what do you do if your partner doesn't want to go, which happens all the time? Do your best to get them to go, but go anyway. Now, the therapist you find, definitely keep your partner in mind. Find someone who you think your partner would feel comfortable with or would like or would respond well to. And then, or at least avoid someone that they wouldn't, right? Maybe there's someone that you would like, but your partner would not relate to at all. Don't go to that person if you want to do couples work. And go to your partner and say this: I love you. We've been struggling with X sexual issue, and I really want this to work, and I want us to address it. And I have found a sex therapist, couples therapist, who I think you're really going to like, but all I'm asking is that you come for me, okay? That you just give it 3 sessions for me. And if you don't want to stay after that, you don't have to stay, but at least try it. Now, a good therapist within 3 sessions will engage your partner and show them that there's nothing to be afraid of, that everything's cool, and that actually this could likely help. Now, if your partner won't even do that, still go to the therapy, because that couples sex therapist will work with you to give you strategies to try to get that partner in, okay? And if your partner still refuses after all that to come to therapy, then that's really important information for you, that your partner is not willing to do the work that's needed to address the issues between the two of you. And then you're in a decision point. So stay in the therapy and work that out. What do you want to do with that information? Are you okay just with the status quo? Are there more things that you could do maybe on your end that might help? Or do you need some support, maybe recognizing that there's only so far you can go in this relationship if your partner isn't willing to meet you halfway? Any of those could be true. And a good therapist is going to help you figure that out. In the end, the biggest misconception or myth that I find about sex therapy or issues around sexuality that require therapy is that the issues are about sex. Yes, sometimes they're about mechanics and troubleshooting or inhibitions for sure. But 99% of the time, including infidelity, the sexual issues that are coming up between the two of you honestly have nothing to do with sex. Yes, you need some sex therapy, you need some direction, you need some concrete homework assignments, but really, it's an individual issue around your own histories, traumas, inhibitions, stories, or a couple's issue around the communication and the dynamics between you. So one of the beautiful things about sex therapy is that once you go through it, not only does your sex life become fantastic, but so does your relationship. If you like this episode, make sure, if you haven't already, to subscribe to and follow The Language of Love on your favorite platform.